When I came back from my trip, a moving truck was parked in front of the house. My son said, "I packed all your things. Go to a nursing home. We need space for my dog." I made one phone call, and he was begging for forgiveness. I'm 70, and I thought I'd seen it all when it came to life's hardships. But nothing could have braced me for what I saw that day. The big white truck with Peterson Moving Services written in bold blue letters should have been my warning. I sat in my old Honda, staring for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. I had been gone for 2 months in Florida, caring for my sister Eleanor after her hip replacement. 2 months of sleeping on her uncomfortable guest bed, cooking her meals, helping with her therapy. I missed my home and my own life, but I stayed because that's what family does. As I switched off the engine, the front door opened. Out came my son, Randall, carrying a box. Behind him was his wife, Nola, clutching my fine china in her manicured hands. "Randall?" I called, stepping out of my car. "What is going on here?" He didn't even look ashamed, just placed the box on the ramp and turned to me with that cold, detached face I'd seen far too often lately. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. Nola lingered by the truck, watching. "Why is there a moving truck at my house?" My voice shook. "We found you a place at Sunset Manor," Randall replied, like it was nothing. "You'll be taken care of there." "A nursing home? I don't need that. I can take care of myself," I said firmly. "Mom, you're 70. You were away for 2 months. What if something happened? We wouldn't even know." "I was with Eleanor and you knew exactly where I was." Then Nola chimed in, her voice syrupy and fake. "Beulah, honey, we're just thinking about your well-being. It's not safe to live alone at your age." "This is my house," I said, holding back tears. "I've lived here for 43 years. Your father and I bought it when you were 2. "We're grateful for all that," Randall said, though his voice told me otherwise. "But we need the space now." "Space for what?" Nola's face brightened. "We got the most adorable German Shepherd puppy. His name is Duke. He'll be huge and he needs a big yard. Our apartment is too small." I stared at her, thinking I'd misheard. "You're putting me in a nursing home for a dog?" "It's not just about Duke," Randall said quickly, though guilt flickered in his eyes. "This house is too big for you. The stairs, the upkeep, it's too much. I've been managing just fine. Mrs. Patterson helps with heavy lifting, and I hire Tommy to mow the lawn." "See?" Nola said smugly. "You already need help." My legs felt weak. I looked at my house. The house where I'd raised Randall, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness, where I'd planned to spend my remaining years. The rose bushes I'd planted were blooming beautifully. The porch swing where I read my morning paper was still there, but now it looked strangely unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked quietly. Randall shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "We talked about it while you were away. It just made sense, Mom." "You've been living in my house for 2 months, going through my belongings," I said, my voice shaking. "We had to pack up your essentials," Nola answered smoothly. "Don't worry, we made sure to choose everything you'll need at Sunset Manor." I walked toward the truck, staring at the stacks of boxes. My entire life was now crammed into cardboard containers. I spotted a few familiar dishes, a couple of small furniture pieces, but so much was missing. "Where's my china cabinet? My wedding photo from the mantel? Your father's chair?" I demanded. "Mom, you won't have space for all that," Randall replied. "The rooms at Sunset Manor are much smaller. We only kept what you'll actually use." Something inside me cracked. Not my heart exactly, but something even deeper. Something that had quietly held me together for 70 years. "When do I have to leave?" I whispered. "The truck's here now," Nola replied. "We've already paid for your first month. Your room's ready." I stood in my own driveway, staring at the house where I had laughed, cried, and built a life. In a few hours, it would no longer be mine. And I wouldn't belong anywhere. "Can I at least see Duke?" I asked suddenly. Maybe if I saw this dog they were so eager to make room for, I'd understand. Nola's face brightened. Oh, he's at the groomer getting his first bath and nail trim. You'll meet him eventually. Eventually? Like I was a distant relative they might remember to visit. As the last of my belongings disappeared into the truck, I realized my own son was now a stranger, and somewhere along the way I had allowed it to happen. The ride to Sunset Manor felt like following a hearse. The first 3 weeks there were the darkest of my life. I barely stepped out of my room, living on the bland meals delivered to my door and staring out at the parking lot below. My back ached from the narrow bed, my heart from betrayal, and my spirit from the loss of everything I'd known. The other residents tried to draw me into games and craft activities, but I couldn't muster the will to care. What was the point? My own son had discarded me like I was nothing. Then Margaret arrived. It was 2 p.m., and I was still in my nightgown, lying in bed, when the door swung open. A woman about my age stepped in, hauling a large suitcase. Her silver hair was pulled into a tidy bun, and her expression carried a fierce determination. Well, she said, glancing around at the cramped room with its 2 narrow beds. Looks like we're roommates. I'm Margaret Sullivan. I managed a faint smile. Bula Henderson. She set her suitcase down and gave me a long, assessing look. You've been crying, she said bluntly. It wasn't a question, and I didn't bother denying it. My son put me here, I told her flatly. Took my house, said it was for his dog. Ah. Margaret nodded knowingly. Family betrayal. I'm here because my daughter-in-law convinced my son I was too difficult to manage. Apparently, asking where my late husband's life insurance money went makes me difficult. Despite myself, I sat up straighter. What do you mean? Margaret began unpacking with quick, deliberate movements. I'm a retired lawyer, Beulah, 45 years of practice. When my husband passed last year, there should have been a sizable insurance payout. Instead, my son told me there were complications, and only a fraction came through. When I asked for the paperwork, suddenly I was diagnosed, by them, with dementia and in need of constant supervision. She pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on her nightstand. The thing about being a lawyer is, you never really retire. You just get more selective with your cases. You're investigating your own son? I asked, incredulous. I'm protecting my interests, she corrected firmly. Something you might want to think about doing the same. I shook my head. There's nothing to investigate. Randall's been perfectly clear. He wants my house so he can have space for his dog. Margaret stopped mid-unpack and gave me a piercing look. Beulah, whose name is actually on your house deed? Mine, of course. It was jointly mine and my husband's, but when Robert passed, it became solely mine. And your son just decided he could move you out and himself in? When she said it like that, it did sound awfully presumptuous. He said I needed care. Do you? I thought about it honestly. Sure, I wasn't as quick on my feet as I used to be, but I'd just spent 2 months caring for my sister in Florida, handling her therapy, cooking, and errands. If I could manage someone else's recovery, I could certainly manage my own life. Margaret sat down on her bed across from me. Beulah, in my experience, when family members push elderly relatives into care facilities and seize control of their homes, there's often more to the story. What do you mean? Has your son ever asked about your will, your finances, whether you've made arrangements for long-term care? I frowned, trying to remember. A few months ago, he asked what would happen to the house when I died, wanted to be sure everything was taken care of. And what did you tell him? That it would go to him. Naturally, he's my only child. Margaret nodded slowly. So he knows he'll get it eventually. The question is, why couldn't he wait? That stung. Maybe he just wanted me safe. Maybe, she said evenly. Or maybe he wanted the house now while he's young enough to enjoy it. How old is he? 48. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Old enough to have his own life, his own place. Old enough to wait for an inheritance like the rest of us have had to. She leaned forward. Did he ever suggest moving in with you? Hiring a home health aide? Installing a medical alert system? I realized the answer was no. None of those options had even been brought up. It went straight from, Mom might need help, to, Mom belongs in a nursing home. That house must be worth a good amount, Margaret mused. Robert and I paid it off years ago, and the neighborhood's improved a lot. The realtor who sends me Christmas cards says it's worth around $300,000. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. $300,000? That's life-changing money. I'd never looked at it that way. To me, it was just home, the place where I belonged. Tell me about this dog, she pressed. Duke, a German Shepherd puppy. Nola said he needs a big yard. Margaret gave a knowing nod. Purebred shepherds from reputable breeders can run into the thousands. Add training, vet bills, and premium food. You're talking about a serious ongoing expense. I thought about Randall's insurance company salary. It was decent, but not enough for that kind of indulgence. Or at least not for the Randall I thought I knew. Margaret, I said slowly, do you think they planned this? I think, she said carefully, that you might want to find out exactly what's been happening with your property since you've been here. She walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot. The thing about nursing homes is, once you're here, people assume you're helpless. They stop asking for your input. They start deciding for you. What are you saying? Margaret turned back, her gaze sharp with the unmistakable presence of the lawyer she once was. I'm saying that being here doesn't make you powerless. You still own that house. You still have legal rights. And if your son thinks he can take over your life because it's easier for him, he's in for a surprise. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt angry. What do you think I should do? Margaret smiled, and it wasn't a gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who'd spent 45 years defending people who'd been wronged, and winning. First, she said, we're going to find out exactly what your son has been doing in your house. Then we'll remind him that his mother is still very much alive. Margaret didn't waste a minute. The very next morning, she was marching me down to the nursing home's business office like a general leading troops into battle. I'd barely finished my first sip of coffee, but she was already fully dressed, hair perfectly in place, that thick file folder tucked under her arm. We need to use your computer, she told the receptionist, a young woman named Jessica, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people move. Jessica blinked, caught off guard. I'm sorry, but residents aren't typically allowed to. We're not typical residents, Margaret cut in smoothly. I'm a retired attorney assisting my friend with legal matters. Surely you have a process for residents who need to access public records. Jessica glanced toward the empty supervisor's office, then back at us. I suppose I could let you for a few minutes, but I'll need to stay here while you do. Perfect, Margaret said, sliding into the chair as if it belonged to her. I stood beside her, watching in awe as her fingers flew across the keyboard. Within moments, she had the county assessor's site pulled up and was entering my address. Let's see what we're dealing with, she murmured. My breath caught when the numbers appeared. My house. I thought it was worth maybe $300,000. It's assessed at $450,000. $450? I whispered. How? Margaret was already pulling up another page. Property values in your neighborhood have been climbing steadily. Look here. Recent sales on your street are even higher than the assessed value. She pointed at the records. One house just 3 doors down had sold for $500,000 only 6 months ago. Another on the block had gone for $475,000 last month. Your son stands to inherit a property worth far more than you realized, she said grimly. Jessica, who had been pretending not to listen, leaned in slightly. Wow, that's a lot for a house. It certainly is, Margaret agreed. Jessica, could you print these records for us? While Jessica went to the printer, Margaret kept typing. Now, let's see what else we can uncover. You said your son's been living there for 3 weeks? Yes, since the day they brought me here. Margaret opened the local newspaper's classifieds. After a few moments, she stopped. Well, would you look at this? Room for rent, beautiful 3-bedroom home, big yard, quiet neighborhood, $2,000 a month plus utilities. My stomach dropped. That's my address. He's renting out rooms in your house, Margaret said, her voice sharp with contained anger, while you're stuck here eating bland cafeteria food and sleeping on a cot. I felt dizzy. He can't do that. It's my house. Legally, you're right, but in practice, if you're not there and people think you've permanently moved into care, he can get away with quite a bit. Jessica returned with the printed pages, and Margaret scanned them quickly. Beulah, I need to ask, have you ever given your son power of attorney? No. Robert and I talked about it, but we never did it. Good. That means he has no legal authority to touch your property. But, she added seriously, he's acting like he does. We spent the rest of the morning tucked away in the nursing home's small library. Margaret walked me through things I'd never even considered. Property rights, tenant laws, the difference between guardianship and power of attorney. The bottom line, she said, is that your house is still yours. Your son is essentially squatting there and illegally renting rooms. But what can I do? I'm stuck in here. Margaret's eyes sharpened with a glint of confidence. Oh, honey, you're not stuck anywhere. You're here because your son told you it was for the best, but you can walk out whenever you want. Leave. The thought had never even crossed my mind. Randall had made it sound final, like a sentence handed down in court. Beulah, Margaret leaned closer, her voice steady. You're not here by court order, and no doctor has declared you unfit. You're here because he convinced you it was necessary. Now you know it isn't. That afternoon, Margaret helped me place a call to my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. My palms were clammy as I dialed. I hadn't spoken to her since I was brought to Sunset Manor, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she'd say. Beulah, her warm, familiar voice came through the line, though there was concern behind it. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. How are you settling in? I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson, I said carefully. But I need to ask, have you noticed anything unusual at my house? A pause. Well, there's been quite a bit of activity. Your son and his wife moved in, of course, but there have been others. Strangers, coming and going. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of strangers? Young folks mostly, college age, carrying in boxes and furniture, and that dog of theirs barks all night. I've had to keep my windows shut just to get some sleep. Margaret was already jotting notes, her brow furrowed. Mrs. Patterson, I asked, did Randall ever mention that I might be coming back? Coming back? Oh no, dear. He told me you'd decided to move permanently into assisted living, said you were happier there and didn't want to deal with the house anymore. After I hung up, I just sat there, numb. Margaret reached over and took my hand. I know that's hard to hear, Beulah, but you need to know what's being said about you. He told her I was happy here, that I didn't want my own house anymore. Margaret glanced at her notes. If your neighbor's right, he's renting to multiple tenants. At $2,000 a month each, 3 or 4 renters could mean $6,000 to $8,000 monthly. The numbers made my head spin. From my house, I said quietly. Exactly, and you're paying $3,000 a month to stay here. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Margaret, I can't afford to be here much longer. I've been using my savings, maybe enough for 2 more months. Margaret studied me for a moment. And what happens when the money runs out? I'd been avoiding that thought entirely. I assumed Randall would help, or maybe I'd apply for Medicaid. And where would you live then? The answer struck me like a blow. I had never once considered that Randall might not take me back. In my mind, this was temporary, just until I got used to the idea of needing help. But if he was pocketing thousands from my property, why would he ever want me home? He never planned for me to come back, I whispered. I don't think he did either, Margaret said grimly. That evening, after dinner, she pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing with quick, deliberate strokes. What are you doing? I asked. Making a plan, she replied without looking up. Your son thinks you're a helpless old woman who'll do whatever he says. She glanced up at me, her eyes like steel. Tomorrow we're going to show him how wrong he is. The plan was simple, but brilliant. The next morning, Margaret called an old friend, a real estate attorney she'd known for years. David, it's Margaret Sullivan, she said into the phone, pacing our small room like a tiger. I have a 70-year-old client whose son has essentially taken over her home while she's in what was meant to be temporary care. I listened quietly as Margaret laid out my situation to David with the sharp precision of someone who had spent decades constructing airtight legal arguments. When she hung up, she had a satisfied look in her eyes. David's going to help us, she said. He's drafting a cease and desist letter to your son, ordering him to stop renting out your home and to return possession to you immediately. But if I leave here, where would I go? I asked, the question that had been gnawing at me for weeks. To your own house, of course, she replied firmly. But Randall said I couldn't manage living alone. Margaret sat down beside me on the narrow bed. Beulah, you've been looking after yourself for 70 years. You spent 2 months caring for your sister in Florida, drove yourself there and back. Does that sound like someone who needs a nursing home? When she said it like that, the truth was obvious, but Randall's words had planted a seed of doubt that had taken root. What if something happens? What if I get sick or fall? What if something happens to anyone? Margaret countered. Your son could be in an accident tomorrow. Mrs. Patterson could suffer a heart attack next week. Being alone doesn't mean you'll die alone, and being with people doesn't guarantee safety. That afternoon, Margaret had a surprise. David was picking us up to drive past my house. My pulse quickened as we turned onto my street. I hadn't been back since the day I was made to leave. The first thing I noticed was the number of vehicles, 4 in my driveway and 2 more parked along the curb. That's a lot of cars for just 2 people and a dog, Margaret remarked. We sat across the street and watched. A young man emerged from my front door with a laundry basket, disappearing into the backyard where my clothesline sagged under garments I didn't recognize. He's using my clothesline, I muttered, feeling an unexpected wave of violation. That's the least of it, David said grimly, snapping pictures. From what Margaret told me, I knew it was bad. But seeing it, it's clear your son's turned your home into a boarding house. More young people appeared, one with groceries, another with boxes, then another after that. How many people live there? I whispered. At least 4 tenants, plus your son and daughter-in-law, David replied. Maybe more. I pictured the living room where Robert and I once watched the evening news, where Randall played with his toy trucks, now possibly someone else's bedroom. I thought of my sewing room where I'd made costumes and mended school uniforms, now perhaps full of a stranger's things. This can't be legal, Margaret said. Single-family homes aren't zoned for multiple unrelated tenants. David nodded. I'll make some calls tomorrow. But first, we'll establish Mrs. Henderson's legal right to reclaim the property. We looped around the block, approaching from the opposite direction. That's when I spotted Nola outside with Duke, the puppy they claimed needed a big yard, except he wasn't a puppy anymore. He was nearly grown and chained to a post in my lawn. That dog is chained, I said, my voice tight. So much for needing space to run, Margaret said coldly. We watched as Nola went back inside, leaving Duke barking until one of the tenants came out to yell at him. This, Margaret said, is what they destroyed your life for, a chained dog and rental money. David drove us back to Sunset Manor, but not before stopping at his office to let me sign the necessary paperwork. The cease and desist letter would be served to Randall the next day, demanding that he vacate my property within 30 days. What if he refuses? I asked. Then we'll file an unlawful detainer action, David explained. In plain terms, we'll have him legally evicted from your home. Can we really do that? Even though he's my son? Mrs. Henderson, David said firmly, the law doesn't care about family ties when it comes to property rights. Your house is your house, period. That evening, Margaret helped me gather the few items I'd brought to Sunset Manor. It wasn't much, mostly clothing, and the bare essentials Randall and Nola had decided I needed. Where's your jewelry? Margaret asked, noticing that all I was packing was a plain watch and my wedding band. I don't know, I admitted. I asked Nola about my jewelry box, and she said they'd put it somewhere safe. Margaret's jaw tightened. We'll add that to the list of things we're getting back. As I folded my clothes, my thoughts drifted to everything else that might be gone. Not just the valuable things, but the sentimental ones. The photo albums of Randall as a boy, my mother's delicate china set, the quilt my grandmother had stitched by hand, Robert's tools, still hanging in the garage where he left them. Margaret, I said softly, what if they sold my things, or just threw them away? Then they'll replace them or compensate you, she said without hesitation. Bula, your son has taken property that isn't his. That's not a disagreement, that's theft. And being related to you doesn't make it any less illegal. I'd never framed it that way in my mind before. I always thought of it as a family issue. But she was right. This wasn't a family squabble. This was robbery. The next morning, I checked myself out of Sunset Manor. The staff seemed surprised, but didn't try to stop me. Because they couldn't. I was there by choice, not court order. Margaret came too, determined to delay her own legal battle with her son, until she helped me win mine. Where exactly are we going? I asked as we loaded our suitcases into David's car. To a hotel, Margaret said. Just for a few days until you're back in your house. A hotel? I can't afford that. You can afford it better than $3,000 a month for a nursing home, she replied. Besides, David knows a place that offers senior discounts. As we drove away from Sunset Manor, I realized something. For the first time in over a month, I felt like myself again. Not a burden. Not someone who needed to be managed. I was simply Beulah Henderson, a woman who owned a home and had every right to live in it. We'd just pulled into the hotel parking lot when my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach clench. Randall? Margaret said, her eyes narrowing. He's gotten the letter. She gave me a satisfied smile. Answer it. Let's hear what he has to say now. I stared at the screen, Randall's name flashing. My hands trembled, but Margaret gave me a small, encouraging nod. Answer it, she whispered. You have the power now. Taking a steadying breath, I pressed the button. Hello, Randall. Mom, what the hell is this? His voice was sharp, nothing like the calm, reasonable tone he'd used to convince me I needed a nursing home. Some lawyer just served me papers saying I have to get out of your house. This is insane. It's my house, Randall. I never gave you permission to rent it out. You're in a nursing home. You don't need the house anymore. I'm not in a nursing home anymore. I checked myself out this morning. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, there was panic in his voice. Mom, you can't just leave like that. You need supervision. You could hurt yourself. I've been taking care of myself for 70 years, I said flatly. I think I can manage. Where are you staying? You can't come back to the house. There are people living there now. I know exactly who's living there. 4 tenants paying you $2,000 a month each, plus you and Nola. That's $8,000 a month you've been making off my property. Another pause. Mom, listen. We can work this out. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. I heard him inhale deeply. The house needed work. The roof was leaking. The furnace was making noises. We had to put money into it to keep it from falling apart. The renters are just helping us cover the costs." Margaret was already jotting notes furiously, shaking her head. She turned the pad toward me. In large block letters, she'd written, "Lies." "Randall," I said evenly. "I had the roof replaced 2 years ago, and the furnace was serviced right before I left for Florida." "Well, there were other issues," he stammered. "And anyway, the renters are students. They needed a place to live. We were helping them out." "While also helping yourselves to $8,000 a month," I countered. "It's not that simple." His voice was rising. "You have no idea how expensive everything is now. Nola lost her job last month, and my hours at the insurance company have been cut. We needed the income." For a moment, old habits tugged at me, the instinct to feel sympathy for my son's struggles. But then I remembered the $3,000 monthly nursing home bills, the dismissive way he'd ignored my concerns, and his utter disregard for my wishes. "So you decided to solve your money problems by taking my house?" "I didn't steal anything," Randall shot back. "You're my mother. When you die, the house comes to me anyway. I'm just managing it early." The coldness in that statement left me momentarily speechless. "When I die? Randall, I'm not dead. I'm not even sick." "But you're old, Mom. You could die anytime. Car accident, heart attack, stroke." "At least this way, I'm making sure the house is being taken care of." At that, Margaret snatched the phone from my hand. "This is Margaret Sullivan, Mrs. Henderson's legal advisor. You have 30 days to vacate the property and return all of Mrs. Henderson's belongings as stated in the cease and desist order." "Who the hell are you?" Randall barked, loud enough for me to hear. "I'm a retired attorney who's dealt with plenty of sons like you. You're not the first to think you can manipulate an elderly parent out of their home." "This is none of your business." "It became my business the moment your mother asked for my help," Margaret said, her tone like steel. "Comply with the notice or we proceed with formal eviction. Your choice." She handed the phone back to me. "Mom, you can't let some stranger turn you against your family," Randall pleaded. "My family turned me against my family," I said quietly. "Margaret's just helping me stand up for myself." "This is ridiculous. You can't throw us out on the street." "You threw me out for a dog," I reminded him. "A dog that's now chained in my front yard. By the way, Duke needs exercise. He also needs a new home, along with your 4 renters and you." I could hear Nola in the background, her voice high and panicked. Then Randall came back on the line. "Mom, let's meet and talk about this. Just you and me, no lawyers." Margaret was already shaking her head, but part of me wondered if I should. Maybe face to face, he'd realize how badly he'd hurt me. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Denny's on Route 9. "Good." "And Mom, don't bring the lawyer." When I ended the call, Margaret looked at me with disappointment. "Beulah, that man will try to manipulate you." "I know," I said, "but I need to look him in the eye and tell him what this has done to me. If he still doesn't understand, then at least I'll know I tried." The next morning, I arrived at Denny's 15 minutes early and chose a booth with a clear view of the parking lot. Margaret had wanted to come along, but I insisted on going alone. Some conversations belonged only to a mother and her son. Randall pulled into the lot right on time, but didn't come inside immediately. I watched him sit in his car, phone pressed to his ear, probably talking to Nola, aligning their story. When he finally walked in, I was startled by how worn down he looked. His hair was messy, his clothes rumpled. The confident man who'd forced me out of my home now looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Hi, Mom," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Hello, Randall." For a moment, we just looked at each other. This was my son, the baby I'd rocked through fevers and bad dreams, the boy I'd cheered for at Little League games, the young man who'd made me beam with pride when he graduated college. When had he turned into this stranger sitting across from me? "Mom, I'm sorry," he said at last. "I know this whole thing has been hard on you." "Hard on me?" I kept my voice calm. Randall, you took my house. You took my belongings. You told everyone I was happy in a nursing home when you knew I was miserable. I thought it was for the best. No, you thought it was convenient. There's a difference. He raked his hands through his messy hair. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Nola's been threatening to leave if we don't sort out our finances. My job's on the line. And the house, it was just sitting there empty while you were in Florida. It wasn't empty, I said sharply. It was waiting for me to come home. But you were gone for 2 months. How was I supposed to know you were coming back? I stared at him. Because I told you I was helping Eleanor recover from surgery. Because I called you every single week. Because that's what temporary means. He shifted uncomfortably. Look, maybe I made some mistakes, but we can fix this. You can move back in. We'll make space. Make space? In my own house? The renters have leases. We can't just throw them out. But there's the guest room. The guest room. In my house. It would just be temporary, until we figure something else out. A coldness settled in my chest. Even now, caught red-handed, he still thought I'd accept being a guest in my own home. Randall, I said quietly, do you love me? His eyes widened at the question. Of course I love you, Mom. You're my mother. Then why did you hurt me so badly? He was silent for a long moment. I didn't mean to. I needed the house. And there it was. The truth. Simple. Crushing. He needed the house more than he cared about my happiness. I rose from the booth, leaving a $5 bill for my coffee. 30 days, Randall. That's what the legal notice says. Mom, wait, but I was already walking away. Some bridges, once burned, are gone forever. As I reached the door, I heard him call after me one last time. Mom, please, I'm begging you. But it was too late for begging. It was time for consequences. The next 30 days passed like a storm clearing. In the first week, Randall called non-stop, his voicemails shifting from guilt to anger, bargaining to outright threats. He said he'd fight the eviction, claim I was mentally incompetent, insist no judge would side with me over my own son. Margaret only smiled and filed every message away as evidence. Let him try, she said. We've got proof of his illegal rental operation, statements from your neighbor about the noise and disruption, and photos of the damage. By the third week, the calls stopped. David told us Randall had hired a lawyer and was trying to negotiate. But the facts were on my side. I owned the house. I had never consented to him renting it. He had to leave. On day 29, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. Your stuff is on the porch. Hope you're happy. Margaret and I drove over in a U-Haul David had arranged. I hadn't seen the place since we'd driven by weeks earlier. My heart pounded as we turned onto the street. The house looked different, not just because boxes and furniture were piled haphazardly on the porch, but because it seemed smaller somehow, less like my home, more like just a building. Mrs. Patterson spotted me and hurried over, relief in her eyes. Beulah, thank goodness you're back. She hugged me tightly. I was so worried. That boy of yours told everyone you'd moved into care permanently, but I never believed it. I'm home now, I said, and it felt better than I expected to say those words out loud. And not a moment too soon, Mrs. Patterson added grimly. The noise from all the young people, the constant parties, the blaring music at all hours, and that poor dog barking nonstop. I even called the city, Mrs. Patterson added. You know single-family homes aren't supposed to be boarding houses. The inspector came by last week and handed out citations. Margaret was already at the porch, sifting through the boxes, methodically taking inventory. Beulah, come see this, she called. I walked over to find her holding my wedding photo. The glass was cracked, the frame bent out of shape. They didn't even bother to pack it properly, Margaret said, her voice low and furious. For the next 4 hours, we sorted through the boxes and pieces of furniture piled outside. Some of my things were there, but many were missing. My grandmother's quilt was nowhere to be found. My jewelry box, my mother's china, Robert's tools, all gone. "We'll send David a complete list of everything missing," Margaret said firmly. "They'll either return every item or pay to replace it." Carrying the boxes inside, I braced myself for what I might see. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality. My home, the place I had cared for over 43 years, looked like a frat house. The hardwood floors I'd polished weekly were gouged and stained. Holes dotted the walls where posters had been ripped down. The kitchen counters were scorched and scratched beyond repair. In the living room, where Robert and I once enjoyed quiet evenings reading, someone had built a makeshift bar. Empty beer bottles lined the windowsill like trophies. "Oh, honey," Margaret murmured, reading the look on my face. I walked through each room, mentally cataloging the damage. My bedroom had been turned into a cramped dorm with 3 single beds shoved inside. The upstairs bathroom had a cracked mirror and a sink so badly caulked it looked like an abstract art project. But the worst hit was my sewing room. My carefully organized creative space, where I'd made Randall's Halloween costumes and gifts for friends, was stripped bare. The shelves Robert had built for my fabrics and supplies stood empty. Even my sewing machine was gone. I sank into one of the few chairs left and cried. Not the helpless tears I'd shed at Sunset Manor, but hot, furious tears. Tears for what had been destroyed, stolen, and could never be restored. Margaret sat beside me, squeezing my hand. "We'll fix it. Every scuff mark, every hole in the wall, every missing piece, and Randall will pay for every penny of it." And that's exactly what happened. David filed a lawsuit against Randall for property damage and theft. The total value of missing and destroyed items came to over $30,000. Randall's lawyer tried to negotiate, but Margaret was relentless. "He stole from his own mother," she told me. "Let him face the consequences." 2 months later, the settlement was final. Randall was ordered to pay for all repairs, replace the missing items, cover my legal fees, and reimburse 3 months of hotel costs while the renovations were completed. I never spoke to him directly again. Everything went through attorneys. Part of me mourned the relationship we had lost, but an even greater part of me felt relief. I no longer had to pretend things were fine when they weren't. Margaret never went back to her own son's house either. "If he wants to see me," she said, "he knows where I live." She rented a small apartment just 2 blocks from mine, and together we became the family we chose, not the one we were born into. The renovations took 3 months. The hardwood floors gleamed again, the walls were freshly painted, and I had the kitchen completely redone. It looked better than it had in years. On the day I officially moved back in, Mrs. Patterson arrived with a casserole and a bottle of wine. "Welcome home," she said warmly. "For real this time." That evening, as I sat in my restored living room with Margaret, I let my mind wander over everything that had unfolded. 6 months ago, I was a quiet widow, living peacefully in the home where I'd built my life. Then, in what felt like the blink of an eye, I'd become a discarded mother, shoved into a nursing home while my own son turned my property into his personal cash machine. But now I was something else entirely. I was a woman who had fought back, a woman who had refused to be silenced, a woman who had learned that the family you choose can be far stronger than the one you're born into. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and froze. Randall. Margaret's eyes met mine. "Are you going to answer?" she asked. I held the phone in my hand for a moment, weighing the question. Then I reached over and switched it off. "No," I said simply. "Some bridges, once burned, are best left that way. And some second chances aren't worth the price they come with." I was home now. Really home. And I planned to keep it that way. Outside, the sun was dipping low over the neighborhood I'd cherished for 43 years. My rose bushes were in bloom again, resilient, thriving after surviving winter and neglect. Like me, they had endured. and they had found a way to flourish despite everything that tried to destroy them. Margaret lifted her wine glass. To new beginnings, she said. To coming home, I replied, and for the first time in months, I truly meant it. Now I'm curious about you, listening to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you faced something like this yourself, Let me know in the comments. And while you're here, I've left 2 more stories on the screen. Both are viewer favorites, and I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.